Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. This is the Comprehensivist series. This is Bucky-inspired comprehensivity to understand and change the world. And I'm honored to have Curt McNamara here talking about his book on Buckminster Fuller. The format today is we're going to have a presentation by Curt about his book, and then we're going to have Q&A. So please keep track of all the questions that you have, all the comments that you have. You'll have plenty of time after the presentation to give your comments and to ask questions. All right. So Curt, the floor is yours, sir.
Okay. Well, thanks, folks, for showing up. And I'll flounder a bit. We have a Bucky Fuller book club now, the Trimmed Up Book Club, and we can add you to the mailing list if you want. Just make sure I have your email. It meets every other Saturday morning Central Time. We go through various books of Bucky's and books about Bucky. And right now we're kind of in between. We finished Cosmic Fishing by Ed Applewhite, and now we're doing two of the essays that Ed recommended as essential for Bucky. One is Omnidirectional Halo, and the other one is Total Thinking. And then there's also a YouTube video of Ed being interviewed about different aspects of Bucky. So we're in that, and then we're going to go on to Utopia or Oblivion. So I mention that because, you know, part of the project I'm talking about today came out of it. And the book club itself came out of a Buckminster Fuller Institute thing called Space Camp. And they've run 6 or so space camps. They're, I don't know, kind of like short courses. They have guest speakers who make presentations. People can put together projects. They have time to get together in small groups and reflect. And it's been very useful. And the book club came out of a space camp. And in fact, that's how I re-met Richard Ramsey, who was here. And also I met John Yoshimi, as well as others. So why did all that happen? So I started that way because we always tell sort of our origin story with Bucky. And so I'm pretty sure that what happened to me is my older brother, who had come back from service and was attending college, gave me a copy or showed me a copy of the Whole Earth catalog. And of course, Bucky was featured a lot in that. And I was interested in science and technology, but I was like, well, this is the 1970s. Well, no, that's what's destroyed the world. I shouldn't do that. But then Bucky convinced me that there was a way, right? There was a way you could stay interested in science and tech, you know, and do good stuff. So that started an interest in the 1970s. And I suppose in the 1980s, I started writing about Bucky, trying to, you know, make his ideas more accessible to various audiences. And then I bumped into the space camp and somebody said, let's have a book club. I said, sure, let's do it. And then when it didn't start, I poked and poked again. And somebody said, well, you'd start it then. So it's been very, very satisfying. So what happened through all that was I said, geez, you know, I've done a number of short videos and I can put in a link to my website, systemeducation.com. And a lot of them are very much rough prototypes. And that's the way to start stuff, they say. So, and you know, they're there and they put a bunch of ideas in front of people. And I thought, well, I should organize the stuff a little bit more and put it in another format, i.e. I should write a book about Bucky's ideas. And so the first title was Bucky for Designers. And I had done a little bit on this in the past when I was teaching sustainable design. I'd used some of his ideas in a couple of different chapters on sustainable design books. And I thought, well, that's kind of a natural. And as I started working it, I thought, well, there's also this idea of big D design, right? Whereas you have to be a designer, right? And, you know, make things like domes, I suppose. And there's the idea of little d design, which is that everybody designs. You put together a party, you organize your bookshelf, you know, even to some extent, you know, when you go shopping for groceries and plan your week's meals, you're doing it. So I thought, well, geez, there's another perspective on it. So I'm kind of working my way back and forth. And of course, like projects, it turns out when you start writing something, it kind of takes on a life of its own. So that's sort of the background to how this thing started. So these are sort of thoughts in process. So let's bring up this presentation. Okay. Let's see if I can find it. I'll try it again, but I can do it. Not that one. We want this one. No. Oh, I'm sorry, guys, but we'll be right there. I know we will. There's the one we wanted. Okay. Let's try this again. There we are. I found the presentation and now I'll go into full screen mode. And then can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So comprehensive design. That's sort of the first step in the book, the first chapter. I was going to take comprehensive anticipatory design science sort of, you know, in sequence. And I mentioned to Shrikant as we were talking for the meeting, the Trim Tab Book Club has worked with BFI. So we've kind of rejuvenated the big ideas section of the BFI website. And so there's been one for a long time, but it kind of all fallen apart. So now it's back together. And if you go there, you'll see what, you know, the 8 or a dozen big ideas that Bucky had. They're there in simple language because there's a lot, right? Really a lot. So this is a graphic I made, I don't know, at least 5 years ago. And it's kind of a silly thing. It's a mashup. And it came out of something that a couple of us have, which is, well, okay, we have all the books, we have the artifacts, you know, and we have all the reports of him working with students, but how did he actually do this stuff, right? And so I thought, well, geez, what if we took some of these ideas, some of his big ideas, like triangulation and ephemeralization, and put them in sort of his favorite structure, right, a tetrahedron. So I would redo this completely today, but the idea is to, you know, think about Bucky and how he acted and how we might act ourselves. So as a part of that process of creating the big ideas website, we said, what were his core teachings? And it's really small text here, so don't expect anybody to get all of it. I can provide a PDF of this afterwards. But you're mostly familiar with his emphasis on the power of the individual, right? He was just this one person, right? And just kept at it. And also then the power of design. You've seen that in all of his artifacts and his talk about design science. The shape of nature, you really, you know, the geometry of nature is kind of the subtitle of synergetics, you know, that can we get at how nature puts stuff together. Systems is throughout synergetics, it's core to everything. And of course, the tetrahedron being the minimal system, and then how systems interact and what happens with them. And then finally, systems change. And we find this as maybe the big attractor for many people to Bucky. They've seen his, you know, epitaph, call me Trim Tab. They've seen his don't fight the existing system, create a new model. They may or may not be familiar with procession, but these ideas have attracted people to Bucky and will continue to do so for quite some time. So we thought these were core things. So then if we talk about comprehensive anticipatory design science, what do we mean? So there's a couple of pages, I think, up on the BFI website where they interviewed people, this is quite some time ago, about what CADS meant to them. This is Bill Perk, who was an associate of Bucky's for many years. Unfortunately, we just lost him. And this should be very familiar to us, you know, listening to Bucky speak. comprehensive. We're starting with wholes. Nature doesn't have these separate departments, right, of physics and chemistry. And also omnidirectional. We look in all directions with that sort of, I'll call it a spherical, right, mindset, the vector equilibrium sort of a mindset. Anticipatory means we're looking forward towards that preferred state where we basically are working with livingry. We've gone beyond killingry, and we're making humanity's success by providing everything they need. They're actually being regenerative and contributing to the health of the whole biosphere. And then Bill takes it apart a little bit more about design and science separately. And of course, design science as a phrase, it's come to mean, I guess, Bucky's ideas on generalized principles. What are the things that are true everywhere and every when? And how can we use design in such a way that we take advantage of those, and so we're not making things that are inefficient or don't fit well. So then if I went into everything I know, transcripts, and I searched for what Bucky said about comprehensive, and I found a couple different things. So here, this first one, big patterns, right? The more we see big patterns, the more comprehensive, the more we learn how these patterns operate, the more we really anticipate, okay? And then, as always, then what do you do with it, right? Are you doing it in a ways that you're considering all what you call the reciprocities, how everything's connected to everything else? And then on the final paragraph, are we conserving the universe? Are we using just the income energies of solar? Or are we using up all the stored stuff we have there? Are we burning up the equipment rather than just leveraging? And then a little bit more, another one of the everything in our lectures, basically you deal with things sum totally in terms of total resources, everything about how the universe is working and why we have what we have here. How do you then employ the physical resources and the knowledge? So a big part of his ideas on comprehensivity is that it wasn't just the physical, it was the metaphysical. And of course, you'll probably recall the physical as the special case experience. Like if I hold up a particular tetrahedron to you, you'll say, well, there you go, there's a tetrahedron. And that's because it's a physical one, right? It's this one on my desk. Okay, so it has size. The idea of tetrahedron, though, is general, and it's independent of size. And so then he would say that, I'm going to say our mind, and I can get these confused, looks at everything we perceive and comes up with the generalized principles, which is, a tetrahedron exists, and it can be this little tiny thing, right? In fact, there's tetrahedrons inside tetrahedrons in each of these corners, right? Or it can be very, very large. So yes, that we consider both the physical and the metaphysical. So it's another aspect of his comprehensivity. And then as he says, if you're going to do this, think about the complete cycle. And this is very much sustainable design, isn't it? Life cycle analysis, what happens at the end. Okay. So this is, I mentioned Bernard Gable, a design science lab. He has opened up registration for the new version coming up this summer. He's held this for, I don't even know, decades now. And it's available via Zoom. He has teams of mostly students, but other people can register for it. And they work on big challenges together. And so he was called the Design Science Lab. He now calls it the Global Solutions Lab. And so he wrote, along with Harold Brown, the Design Science Primer, which is, considered one of the key texts in sort of taking Bucky's idea about design science and making it accessible to us. So this is the sequence from left to right. And on the left, when you start, you choose something to work on. What's your challenge? Who are the stakeholders, I would say? And then you say, where are we at right now today? And then you look towards the future. What is that preferred state? And then you start to go into design. So what I described was in the brownish olive on the left side, and that's really where I'm starting the book and what we're talking about today. So it's not that back end stuff. Now, if you're doing this, so once again, if I go back, if you're in that initial phase and you're looking around, you're defining the preferred state and thinking about the future, you need to be aware of all sorts of things, right? You need to be comprehensive. So he gave us a list of what he called design science strategies. And what does this mean? It means these are things you should be familiar with and consider as you start a comprehensive investigation into a solution. And so then there's lots of stuff in here, you guys, geography, communications, economics, etc. It's really interesting. And to me, it's kind of like coming up with different maps. And this is actually a practice employed in other methodology like trees, the theory of meta problem solving, we'll mention briefly in here. So then in this first stage, once again, this oval, when we're thinking about it, obviously we got the people, and we got the challenge, and then what's all the stuff kind of around them? That's our first step in comprehensivity. And these are things we could think about. I think nowadays, most of us would add the social and the cultural as part of it, right? And this is just part of, bringing Bucky along, what Lionel in our book club calls Bucky 2.0, right? We're taking what he did and putting it a little bit bigger. So I often have this as a slide for students and others, which is, well, what if you had your own design laboratory? You've probably seen those pictures of Bucky at Black Mountain College, sitting in the corner with all those models and playing with stuff or doing experiments, right? So what did he have? He had his ideas, he had paper, he had ways to do this, what they call it extended cognition, right? Where you transfer your ideas to paper and then you have other people look at them and you think about it in a different way. So he had model making material, he got other people to come in and work with him. That was his design science lab. What would you have in yours? And we have some people in the book club that are interested in body work. Well, what would be in the design science lab, somebody doing, comprehensive disciplinary design on body work? Well, obviously they'd have some texts, they'd have some equipment, they'd have some examples, right? They have teachings, by the various masters of different arts, if you will, of the body. So this isn't the thing just about making domes, is what I'm trying to say, right? Your design laboratory is going to look pretty different. If you were, I think last week in 410 missed, but I'll review it. Kirby was talking. What does his design science lab look like, right? And his is, I think, a lot of it's in the computer, but he also makes models. So the question is, if you took a few minutes, what would yours look like and how could you help to make that a reality? All right. So then Bucky really emphasized that when we start, we need to tune in to a particular frequency. All right. And so that's the center of this illustration. The numbers you see are from synergetics, if you see a number of a figure. And in this case, on the left, you see what he calls the untuned micro. These are things that are smaller than the system of interest. Like, for example, if it's me, this might be my liver, it might be my kidneys, right? Those might be the untuned micro aspects of a system involving me. And then the larger one on the right, as you expand out, this one is the untuned macro. And so what are the things that would not necessarily affect me in the situation we're looking at? I don't know, maybe political stuff doesn't impact me, maybe geologic doesn't impact me, but I'm aware of it. And one of his insights was that there's a frequency at which you tune in, if you will, sort of like tuning in a receiver. He called it frequency modulation or demodulation, I guess. And the things that are small that you're ignoring are smaller, as I said, and they're faster. Because it turns out that if you have shorter frequency, it's basically faster. And that kind of makes sense. The stuff inside me is running faster typically than, me moving around. And then the things outside me are larger and smaller. So like geologic systems and political systems are both larger and slower, larger and slower. So that's a real insight of Bucky's, is that we should look both at smaller and faster things and say, yep, they're there and we're aware of them. We're not going to make use of them right now, but we're totally aware of them. And we're going to look at larger and slower things as well. This was explained well in a fuller explanation by Amy Edmondson, and she called it tunability. And what she said is, you might come into the living room and what do you focus on? Did you look at the red overstuffed chair? or the carpentry that's what's made of or how it's upholstered. But you might look at something else. And when you do it, that's what you tune in on. So if you're tuned into the chair, aspects of like the internals of the chair are those smaller microsystems, and things like the room are those slower macrosystems. So somebody, maybe it was even in this group, I forget, said, sometimes it seemed like Bucky had these special glasses with a microscope in one eye and a telescope in the other. So then another version of this from Bucky, and this is a third of an illustration, just zoomed into 1/3 of it. So you can see in the middle, you can't quite read, but finite, maybe irrelevancy, too small, too fragmented, and you're almost, and then you're what he calls lucid irrelevant. So that's what we're looking at right now, and then you're beyond that, you're a little bit slower. So once again, this is a core tool of Bucky's and comprehensivity, is looking at things that are smaller and faster and larger and slower that surround us. But remember now, you can do this in a whole variety of domains. So this could be in a social cultural domain. It could be in a geological domain. It could be in a weather system domain. And you'll gain by doing these overlays. And if you're making a physical artifact, obviously you have to worry about a number of these. So then it's worth mentioning systems once again. So I like the illustration. It was taken from a book I saw, I think probably at one of the things that CJ put together, the SNEC meetings. And so you are subdividing a tetrahedron, and guess what? You have all kinds of things inside it once you do it. This is called increasing the frequency. So, but the tetrahedron has these 4 corners, and that's where it connects, right, the external world, because everything is connected to everything else, and the edges aren't solid, right? They're forces or relations, they're dynamic. There's some interaction at the corners, at least it occurs for microseconds at least, to allow that to hold together. And so then this is our fundamental idea of system. So the system, like I said, is composed of relations, those are the edges, and they are active, right? I seem to be a verb. So the edges are forces or flows, and then they connect at the corners. And Bucky said all the corners are leaky. If you actually look up leaky corners in synergetics, you find a bunch of stuff. So that's where they come together. We sometimes call these the nodes. Oops, and I wanted to go back. And one of the interesting things you can do, and this is kind of Richard Ramsey-esque, if you will, is that you can take circular things, and that's what I did as a mashup in the lower right corner. So Peter Senge had a cycle of learning. This is, what do they call it? The OODA loop, observed, orient, or orient, observe, decide, and act, kind of a thing, and it's shown as a circle. But guess what? In life, you might jump around various ways. It's actually a tetrahedron, and you might not go in a particular sequence, but they're all interconnected. So I did the same thing with Senge's things about learning, that reflecting and deciding and connecting were nodes, and you can explore things this way. And this is now almost John Yoshimi-ish, probably. Okay, and then how do systems couple together? So let's get a figure from synergetics, and it turns out on the lower right corner, they can couple at just a point or a node. And so then that kind of looks like this, right? There's the single point, and Bucky said, well, this is kind of like a gas where things can just sort of spin around. They really aren't connected to each other and that sort of thing. And then they can connect at an edge where the 2 edges come together. And now there's some give and take. And finally, they can connect at a face. And when they do that, it's actually one system at this point. They're no longer 2 systems. So there's a lot of stuff we can take out of that as well, right? We know a lot of extractive systems from the earth where we just like pull stuff out and never put anything back. Well, that's a bad thing, right? So that therefore we know that regenerative systems always give something back, right? If they take something somewhere, they're giving something else back somewhere else. And then this is, this is another example of that. Just done in a thing called V.
Curt,
so this was a V-zone model, which is basically zone tool. And I thought, oh, I'll just play around and make a couple things. If you haven't played with VZone, it's great. It's easy. We've actually got a couple of videos that Paul Hildebrand did for us in the Trim Tab Book Club. But this is just showing, how easy you could put these kind of things together to explore it. Now, why did I do this? I wanted to show, excuse me, that one way to consider this, looking at comprehensivity, is what are the systems inside that boundary? Remember when we tuned in, we said, well, this is the frequency we're looking at, and there's lower, larger things, there's smaller and faster things. What's in the boundary is systems, I think, right? And almost always more than one. So therefore, you have interacting systems in the boundary. And so this is what this is trying to show. You've got three systems kind of floating in space and this other thing around it that's a boundary. Well, it turns out once you've actually got the solution, if you will, or the design, these systems have come together in such a way that they define the boundary. I don't have a good illustration of that yet, but just consider this, that this is really, I think, how things are happening. And here's another view, and now you can see a little bit better how the system is just floating there. And then the mind map is just some steps you might take. So this is potential book material. I haven't really worked this in yet, but it seems obvious that with all of Bucky's talk about systems interconnection, that this sort of thing should be in there. And then in this one, I started to look a little bit towards those things like trim tab, and if your design situation is actually influencing a larger system, which is what trim tab is doing, right? Versus creating a design system, what are the kind of things you'd look at? So just kind of related stuff. Now, all this, I think, is kind of very similar to the front end tools of a thing called design thinking. And now you've had presentations from Harold Nelson, and he's got, sort of a system that's beyond design thinking, I would say. And it was people like him, I think, that were the inspiration for design thinking. But design thinking is very widespread in industry now. And if you look at the lower left corner, it consists of, at first you empathize, like who are the actual people affected by this thing? We think we have to go and do this sort of a fix or a solution or something, but we better go talk to the people first. That's what they say in design thinking. So you empathize first. And then once you've empathized enough and you've got to know these people, you say, well, here's what we kind of hear the problem is, there's, we might, and I was in a workshop once where it was about education, and we're like, oh, we got to fix education on the north side of Minneapolis. Oh, well, let's talk to the people who are up there and figure out what they think is important, right? Because if we come in as sort of do-gooders from outside, we're not going to do the right thing, right? And so then you talk to the parents and the teachers and the students, and then when they give you enough information, you kind of feed it back to them. That's called the define phase in design thinking. You do all this before you go ahead and start prototyping solutions. And there's the mindsets on the right, focusing on human values, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that this stuff all maps pretty well to design thinking. And as you might suspect, this might be a way to piggyback some of Bucky's ideas into some of these other tools that people are familiar with. And then what are some typical tools in the empathize phase of design thinking? A beginner's mind, user interviews, looking at people who are at the limits, or surviving on very little or on very much, journey maps, et cetera. So there's a lot of rich material here that I think overlaps pretty well with what Bucky actually did. And then it's easy to put together system maps. And I like this particular method, which is called a concept map, because as soon as you draw a line that connects two things in a concept map, a question mark pops up and it says, what does this line mean? Because guess what? Remember what Bucky said, it's all about the relations. It's all about the edges. So therefore you need to say, what are those flows? And if you look at this one, and this was, I think my idea was, oh, so we want to make a more regenerative food system. Well, what's happening? Well, there's a household that's making decisions, and sometimes it's just buying from the supermarket, and sometimes it's influenced by the media, or sometimes other people, but maybe there's small farms, and then how would they connect to it? And then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you see that some of these arrows are actual physical stuff, like food or money, and some are metaphysical, like influence. And this is also very Bucky-esque. So I think these are all related ideas. And this is just an example of a rich picture done without that mapping technique. And you can just see, here's Jenny at her desk kind of being overwhelmed by work. And so this is once again that first step, the empathize step in design thinking, which represents, you know, the rich picture, which is a tool actually I think called soft systems methodology, and I could talk about that if you want. But it's an easy way to get people to just draw stuff together, right? For everybody to get involved with it. And if you leave it as on a casual basis, they feel comfortable critiquing it and adding to it. So it's just a nice methodology. And so this is an article. There's also some really good practical books about this. And like I said, as you do it and just try and put it into this kind of a tool, it's going to prompt you, what does this relation mean? Turns out the relation is a system in itself. It's interesting. Oops, went too fast. Okay, try again. So then I went off and said, oh yeah, metaphysical and physical. Bucky said that, didn't he? Well, what did he say about comprehensivity and synergetics? And so one of the things emphasized is that combination of physical and metaphysical, right? Physical is the one we experience with our senses, right? And concept of metaphysical is the one we perceive. It's those generalized principles, it's the way tetrahedrons can come together, etc. So both are finite scenarios. There's a lot in here. I won't be able to get into it too much, but just to emphasize that there's strong support for this idea that our comprehensive views have to be on the physical and the metaphysical. And just think about it. If we said that, oh, we're going to fix a problem with a person who's hungry by giving them food, you know, if they're not connected into a network of people, they don't feel good about how they're getting it, it's not going to be a solution. We didn't address the metaphysical aspect of it. In fact, in some cultures, they'd say that if you deal with the metaphysical first, like in native cultures, they actually have an upside down version of Maslow's hierarchy. You can Google the Blackfoot hierarchy, and it turns out Maslow may have taken it and turned it upside down when he showed it to us. But what they would say is, unless you first feel accepted by the community and you feel like part of it, you can't really take care of yourself. So this is really interesting stuff. So anyway, if you go on just further in synergetics, you have columns of things of the physical and the metaphysical, and that which is communicated or understood as metaphysical, but the means of communication are physical. Metaphysical is unweighable and ponderable. Physical is always apprehendable by an instrument. Conceptioning is metaphysical, sensing is physical. So this just helps us kind of explore this and tease these things apart, and which will give us a whole nother tool that we can use. And so then for a while, I taught a class on Bucky, and I said, well, you know, you're all polyhedra, metaphysically polyhedra, right? We have interests, you know, things that we like to do. For example, this, like I'm putting something out and you guys are taking something in, but we're going to give back and forth to each other, right? Make a complex system. So they did examples like this and just mapped themselves and said, oh yeah, I have some outward actions and some is interfacing with other people, et cetera, et cetera. So this is just going a little bit off on the metaphysical side. Now, there's probably beyond where I can get in the book, especially the first chapter, but you're a willing audience, so I just thought I'd leave this in here. So what are we saying now? Once again, you know, we're tuning in, right? And we're sort of ignoring some of the slow stuff. Metaphysically, there's some slow stuff we might ignore at this point, right? We might ignore certain things about the planets or certain things about our big belief systems, and certain things that are smaller and faster as well. So the same thing I'm saying that we see in the physical tuning in is true of the metaphysical tuning in. All right, and then this will go kind of quickly. So this is from a short piece called Requirements for a Dwelling Advantage. It turns out, I think a lot of this is actually reprinted in Omnidirectional Halo, but this is Bucky's same figure. And what is he showing there is the double dashed line in the center is the dwelling. And inside it is the human organism that the dwelling exists for, and outside of it is things that are out there. And then look at all these things, like you got these low frequency things like earthquakes and big storms and stuff that you have to protect from. So there's a long list of requirements for a dwelling advantage in here. He's talking about tuning into the senses down here in B, what happens in the skin and nervous system. That's not where we're looking right now. We're looking at the double dash line, but we're aware that this stuff is happening, right? And then this is me just making a simple mind map of the things he talked about. He said, well, there's some random and subjective things. And by the way, his subjective doesn't mean what we think. We've had some discussions, and in fact, the thing I think CJ talked about, the subjective is things you're subjected to, as opposed to objective, which I think is more the generalized principles. But I could be wrong, and one of you might know. There's things, random subjective things, as well as routine subjective things, and then there's also random as well as incisive objective things. Okay. So then what did he do with this? Well, this, like we said, is sort of his first prototype. These pictures are all from Your Private Sky, Lars Mueller publishers. And so then, house on the mast, more details from the house on the mast. You're still basically working the first prototype. And then, the grain bin house, very similar. And then the Demaxian house. And I always love this illustration because the cylinder on the left side, that's a shipping container. So everything that's in that Demaxian house on the right fits in that cylinder on the left. Pretty interesting. And then the restoration that I think J. Baldwin did. This is in the Dearborn Museum, Ford Museum. One-piece bathroom in the lower left, where he didn't just sort of reduce to practice, right? The bathroom was low flow shower head. It was completely modular. He had a business where he could deliver them on the back of a truck and install them. And then on the right side, well, that's just showing how the airflow happened. So you had passive heating and cooling in these as well. And then, of course, the very first dome, right? The one that didn't work, the one that did work at Black Mountain. And then, of course, domes just exploded, right? And if you're ever in England, see the Eden Project, very inspirational aspects of domes. And then one thing that he patented, this chilling dome, where, by the way you do this, the way that air enters at the edges at the bottom and leaves at the top, you can actually reduce the temperature inside by a significant number of degrees. In fact, somebody in Minnesota is now working on this. And I think that was it. Look at that. I did pretty good. So,
wow.
There's a bunch of stuff.
Wow, Curt, that was incredible. That was incredible. And I would appreciate it if you send me the presentation so we can go through, we can all go through it very carefully. Just incredible stuff. And I really look forward to your book, and you're welcome to come and talk about parts of the book whenever you want. It's a standing invitation. Okay, you just tell me when you want to talk about it, and I will just go ahead and arrange for you to talk about it. Because what happens is that the earlier the ideas get out, I know I have worked with many authors, and it's a very difficult profession because it's a lonely profession, but having this back and forth is the best way of getting everything, actually the book will come out faster. So go ahead and type an exclamation mark. I'm going to start with people who are very familiar with Bucky, and then we will go from there. So any firstly comments, especially people who are very familiar with Bucky, would love to hear what you have to say about this presentation, because I want Curt to get feedback on what he's doing. So Peter, give me just a second. Let me go ahead and unmute. Peter, go ahead.
First, that was just outstanding, Curt. So thank you. I didn't realize that you taught this stuff as deeply as you do. And what a great education. And Synergetics was a book and concepts that I just was never able to get through. I got onto something more practical when I got involved with the Genie Initiative, and I never got into studying synergetics. I think I went through Amy's book, A Fuller Explanation, and did a course with her that had you built the structures, and that was a simple lesson of the core structures, the 3 fundamental structures. But so what Curt is doing is helping translate, for me, one of the most dense principles into visual utility. You know, how do we take this synergetic concept, and it's more than a concept. It's like again, it's one of those generalized principles, and make it accessible. And that's I'm going to be a student, Curt, much more deeply now. I was. I took some pictures of your graphics, and I'm going to study them a lot. So thank you for that. And so that's, again, I wrote in that's a wow, just as Shrikant said at the end.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. I want to add one thing. So again, folks, go ahead and type exclamation mark first for comments on what you think. The thing that I particularly love about this presentation is all the mind maps and all the figures. Because what it does is that it allows you to pull together in one visual picture many things and see their connections, the connections between them. It is far more easy to grasp it this way than to read it over chapters in a book. I'm not saying that that book is not needed after that, but with this as a guide, this as a map, you can walk through the book and get a lot more from it. So thank you so much for all the diagrams and all the mind maps. Next up is going to be Richard, followed by Joe. Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I finally got it unmuted here. Well, I liked everything about what Curt was presenting. The thing that really struck me the most is the concentric circles that have to do with the micro and the macro. And for me, it ties back to the Synergetics book that has the subtitle Geometry of Thinking. And that was one of the first things that Bucky kind of impacted me about, was how do we change from whole to part thinking and move away from part to whole thinking. And it was that concentric circle that sort of captured it for me, because he said every morning when you get up or whenever you're doing anything, you start way out there at the universe, at the biggest possible thing. And then in a nanosecond, you travel through all of those rings that are mostly irrelevant until you get to the particular. And even when you think of the micro, as you say, the inside, whatever my liver is doing, doesn't really I don't pay much attention to it unless I've got an ailing liver, and then it becomes relevant. And so that concentric circle for me always allows you to think holistically and then down into the particular and back out. For example, when I come through the universe and I pass through the moon phases, they are irrelevant to me until a certain time of the month. And then moon phases do have an impact on ourselves or human living. And so all of a sudden, what was irrelevant yesterday becomes relevant today. And so it allows you with that ebb and flow between what's relevant and what isn't. And anyway, so that's, I love that concentric circle approach and how it can help us shift from whole to part instead of part to whole thinking.
Yeah, it's amazing how much he managed to put into this presentation. I love the idea of tuning, that everything is happening around us at all these scales, and you're aware of some of it, you're tuned into some of it, and you're not tuned into other parts of it. But when you need to, you can do that. So you have this, the tune, what you're tuned to is a variable. and there's a lot going on. Wonderful. Next up is John, followed by Joe. John and Yoshimi.
Yeah, Shimi is a separate point, but what interested me was I loved the idea of empathize first. And then I suddenly realized that that's another example of tunability or tuning in. So you need to tune into your audience as well as your content if you're a teacher. Just an interesting parallel. And Yoshimi had another point.
Oh, no, I appreciate Peter's description of visual utility. And I think your presentation, we're starting as a group. We're starting as a group to make it real for people. Because what we've been talking about in Bucky's work for decades now is so amorphous and so difficult for so many to grasp, to understand. And now is the time we really do need to come together, and we are. And I love Curt's thing, mapping your systems, because we just changed the name tetramine to emergently. So mapping your systems emergently, hey, it's all coming together. So thank you, Curt.
Wonderful.
And the beauty of the emergent system is that it is regenerative, as it's been proven with 1 + 1 = 4.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. I love his diagrams where he showed the interaction between systems, one which are just connecting at a point where there is just one-way flow going on. It's kind of, and then edges connecting and the faces connecting. I'd never really thought of that. Just beautiful. Next up is going to be Joe.
Yeah, this was fantastic. I mean, I really appreciate it, especially the idea of tuning in and tuning out, because you're subdividing the universe and you're drawing a boundary, and you're able to actually start to put these things into action. And like you could start to use the mind map within that and start to understand exactly what the connections are within those boundaries. So for me, this was a really very helpful. And I too agree with the beginning with empathy is actually something that has been taught regularly in design thinking, but the way you laid it out is very much in the same lines of Harold Nelson's, actually, with the idea of using a beginner's mind and having actually, and it maps back to what John and Yoshimi were doing too, the how and the why, the what, the how, and the why. All that approach actually fits into your framework. So this was very, very, I mean, I took a couple of screenshots myself and I'm looking through it now. And this is really helpful for me because it's a very practical way of putting together I don't want to say a project, but at least putting together an approach so that you can actually see connections within a system. That's the best way I could say it. So thank you.
Wonderful. Laura, what did you get from the presentation? Go ahead. And folks, anybody else who wants to comment, go ahead and type exclamation mark. We'll do the comments and then we'll go to the questions. Let's see. Okay, I can't hear Laura. Okay, anybody else? Okay, if the comments are done, let's go to questions. Go ahead, if you go ahead and type exclamation mark. If you would like to ask a question, you can always add comments. Now, this is a back and forth now. Okay, this is the back and forth session. We're going to start with Paul. Paul, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. Love this ongoing series. There's been a lot about the tetrahedron from the start of when Shrikant rolled this out. And I have some experience with design in the software world and object-oriented design. And we might do a map that you did. And then there's this concept in object-oriented design that you want the objects to really be basically as close to the physical thing that goes on in the bank or the warehouse or wherever as possible. So there's no level of abstraction that's different. So my question is that the same in your thinking here? Or are you trying to somehow put the map that you showed that was a bit messy from one of the various maps of what the real world does and map it into something that has a tetrahedral life or shape? Or that's my question.
Go ahead, Curt.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I'm a believer in that old saying, and I can't tell you who said it, the map is not the territory. And everything we do, right, is mapping, all science. If you look at that interview of Ed Applewhite by Robert Duchesne, I want to say, about synergetics and Fuller, the interviewer is like, well, how could you prove synergetics is right? Does it really reflect all of the universe? And we're all thinking, it's just like any other tool, right? Hopefully it's a better tool, but it doesn't exactly match every aspect of reality. It couldn't. I mean, we all know that there's all different kinds of ways to model something. There's all different kinds of ways to learn, right? Sometimes story is much more effective than an equation. So there's one part of it. Now, having said it, I think almost all the stuff we do with maps and models and equations is flat. And this is a whole different subject in a way. And I think almost all the scientists and engineers could gain by saying, well, but if model represents an actual system, it's got to have closure, doesn't it? I should be able to, put it together in such a way that I could, say it's polyhedral and this is connected, and if it's not, I've ignored something, and maybe it's important, maybe it's not, but at least I should know what I did. And then I guess the third thing is that, Shrikant mentioned that, that single point of connection, you can see that's sort of an extractive thing. Well, we know that's, that's not sustainable. And whereas the 2 points, there's a flow in and a flow out, and now we have the exchange. So I do think that aspect of it, of saying, how could we look at that actual thing and make a quote unquote model that emphasized, oh, does your thinking contain at least 2 points of connection? Does it contain at least a comes into and it goes out of kind of a thing? So I'm not sure I've answered your question, but I think I've danced around it, and I'm intrigued by the fact that the object-oriented people are doing that. That's great.
Thank you. It's beautiful.
Thank you. Laura, what's your question? Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to take it all the way to the point where it's become product, let's say, and you have to confront teachers who are severely undereducated, let's say, in math, and have great fear. And empathy obviously has to start there, but you need more than empathy, because you have a fear factor of a very high degree and a resistance like you cannot imagine. I mean, they don't want to see you. They don't want to see your curriculum. They don't immediately have no belief in it because they can't do it. These are teachers who know one way to solve a problem. And if their kid solves it another way, it's wrong because they didn't solve it the way they solve it, because they can't do it. So that's part of it. So how do you deal with that? And let's say you have a room full of people and a lot of dissent, but there's some people who go with it. I don't see a compromise as part of this modeling where that would fit into this. And I love all of it. I really do. And I would wish that every school, teachers from K to 6, let's say, have to work on a curriculum together using these kinds of models. Very much so. That's all.
Wonderful. Great question, Laura. Thank you. Go ahead, Curt.
Yeah. And so, synergetics isn't even accessible to many people, right? You've heard people in this group say, well, I tried it, but I gave up. And the why of it is that, and we're learning more about this from having read, Ed Applewhite's book about writing synergetics, co-creating it, I should say, is that Bucky wanted to make sure, that he really captured the, all the fine parts of his thought. So, but if we go back to the simple models, anybody can do this, right? And there's this famous example of, Bucky kind of discovering the tetrahedron because he went to kindergarten or wherever, and he was so farsighted he couldn't see a thing. He was just like trying to figure out what was what. And then he put together this simple structure, and when it was like a cube, he could push it around, it wasn't stable. And then when he got something that looked like this, all of a sudden it had the stable structure. And those were actually the Froebel gifts. I don't know if you've ever looked at that. But that was the thing invented by this Frederick Froebel in the 19th century when kindergarten became a first thing, and there was a whole sequence of activities for kids to do their hands on. It's a huge thing that we should just go back and do, right? And now it's getting more attention. So I think, and I could, so now that you say that, I'll make sure I put a reference in the slide deck to this gal that made a book where it just showed you how to make very simple things. So I think your point is very well taken, but I want to actually bounce it to Richard Ramsey because he has an excellent story about teaching in a situation with kind of an audience that you were thinking about, and when he used a model, he actually got some connections. Am I putting on spot, Richard, or you remember that one?
Go ahead, Richard. You need to unmute.
Well, yeah, a couple of things. The main thing I wanted to speak to in terms of the question was the use of a mathematical formula or equation that that Fuller had that helped you sort of be able to determine the number of interconnections between any number of corners that you had or you knew about, including those that might be unknown in the sense of they might surface at some point. And that formula was the number of relationships equal the number squared minus the number divided by 2. And it's very easy in looking at a tetrahedron because you can visually sort of prove whether the equation works. So you take 4 corners, you square to 16 minus 4 gives you 12 over 2 is 6. Now that formula supposedly applies to whatever number you have. And so my question really in terms of the mapping is that when we do the kind of mapping that you were showing, it doesn't always show each node connected to every other node. So I'm just wondering what you think about bringing that kind of equation into the sort of mind mapping. And a very easy variation of that formula is to take the number and then minus 1 from that number, because otherwise you're not going to connect to yourself, you're going to connect to everybody else. So you take that number, 4 again, n minus 1 is 3, 4 times 3 is 12, divided by 2 is 6. And so it's a much simpler sort of variation of that formula to get people using what was just being said about the math. And all of a sudden the math, I think, will come alive and say, oh my God, I can see all these relationships. And I can tell if I've got 10 points or 10 things, I can tell. Now, what happened, and I think maybe this is what you're getting at one story, we designed this model, the tetrahedron model, to illustrate what I'm getting at. So we said, so how many things in you are important to you, like your mind, your body, your physical, your emotional, so you can count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, let's say. How many values are important to you, by the rule or by the law, by a faith belief, by something. And then you look at how many people in your life on a daily basis are important to you, a family, friend, etc. And then you look at societal institutions. and you can count up how many you're dealing with in a given day. You apply the formula, and I did that with a person one time who came in with 2 or 3 serious problems. And so when we did the formula, it ended up showing that she was dealing with dozens of relationships. Only 2 were out of whack. And so when I showed it to her, she said the instant response she had was, no wonder I wake up in the morning with a headache. And what that did was it legitimized her headache. And she had a right to it as far as she was concerned. The other thing that it did on the positive side was to say, look, you've got 2 relationships that are giving you trouble, but you got 52 that you seem to be managing okay with. So let's balance the number that are out of whack with the number that are probably going okay. And anyway, that's the question, and then the comment about how we use the counting and the relationships to help people become more positive about what's going on in their own life, even though they may have problems to deal with.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Richard. Sorry to put you on the spot, but so back to Laura. And so what Richard and others have found also is that, you know, even with the students who you might consider really a challenge or really checked out or whatever, if you can get them away, you know, to doing something physical, hands-on, and especially like he says, if they can see where it actually connected to something in life experience, it's just such a totally different way, as you can imagine, in the classroom. So there are things, we're not trying to minimize, you know, what you're saying. It's different ways of teaching. And yeah, I don't have an answer. And then to Richard's challenge, yeah, thank you. That's an excellent challenge to every time I do a map, say, okay, that's a linear hierarchy. Let's connect it up, connect the dots. So I'll take that on. So thank you both.
Thank you. I just want to point out, you know, there's this couple, Ruth Bernstein, who study comprehensivism, who was here, and they were presenting, and they said that our ideas face the strongest opposition from science teachers. And so I asked them why. This is because they are really focused on the results of science, and they are against the process of doing science. So if you look at Bucky, he's all about you trying to understand the world and operating that way. The way in which most of these teachers, science teachers, are operating is that goods are here, you know, these are the theories. I'm just going to deductively tell you what they are, which is very, very easy thing to do, and which actually is not the spirit of science. And it will kill the spirit of science in anybody who is trying to understand the world on their own. That's one thing. Second thing is that many of these problems are multidimensional. There are many different factors that shape it. And Bucky is aware of them, of what is there, you know, what are you tuned into, what is the context, what is around it, and what are the various directions in which, through which the thing that you're studying is being affected. Whereas a person who wants to take the easy route, they are just following one line of thinking, one causality, without understanding. But it takes a great deal of responsibility to say, look, I am going to try to understand the world. Even if I'm confused, I'm going to try to do it on my own. That's the thing that Bucky started with at the age of 32, which is what sets him apart. And this entire work of Bucky is based on that core idea, which is very different from what is being done in education.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Laura. Next up, really good question, Laura. Thank you. Next up is a question by Jeff. Jeff, go ahead.
Thank you, Curt. It was that was a fantastic presentation from A to Z. One of the things that resonated with me and struck me in it was on the design slide, where on the bottom right was the element of radical collaboration. And I was reminded of CJ, who titled his orientation Collaborating for Comprehensivity. And that this idea about the significance of collaboration, I think is often underestimated. And in so many ways, from whom are we serving to even what's the goal, to what's our perspective, what are our multiple perspectives about what's going on, rather than just one person alone, their single perspective, to just the diversity of ideas that people might have, the approaches that they bring, and the diversity of factors for making a decision, based on their experience and what they've learned that they might bring into it. So this radical collaboration that I do think CJ was really onto something there, I think is very significant. And so my question is, how does it fit into what is clearly, a fantastic, thinking process? But it's not just a thinking process employed by a single autonomous individual. It's a person doing that in relationship with others. And I'd like to hear your sense of that, because personally, I think it's an underappreciated aspect.
Yeah, that's great. So one of the recent books I've read that really had an impact on me was The Extended Mind, which took this, they call it the 4E model of cognition, and I think it developed out of what's called cognitive science, where they're trying to figure out, how do people operate, and so we can make better computers. But to me, it just, showed how people have done things over time. And there's, 4 different E's: embodied, inactive, et cetera, et cetera. I'll put a link in to a paper on music that I think has a really good explanation of these E's. You may be already familiar with it, but others will gain by it. So the one I like to focus on is extended. So once we start making that diagram or the model, and we show it, I show it to Richard, and he says, or John, and he says, oh, but what about this edge? What about this other connection? We now, we've taken something out of our head. In fact, it really wasn't in our head. It was really in our hands as well, until we started making it. It wasn't, there is a quote in the book of Feynman, who has drawn some figures as he's explaining something, and the interview says, oh, that's a record of your thoughts. And Feynman says, well, no, those are my thoughts. I could not have, expressed that unless I was actually physically writing something down for you to look at. And so this idea of this shared representation, but essentially beyond words, right, to make it physical. So, this is in line, with what Richard is saying is, make those maps have some shape, Curt, kind of a thing. I think it's super important. And I totally agree with, so many of us are like, oh my gosh, this is a problem and I know how to fix it. Well, we can never put a team together that way, right? Because that person, even if they're passionate about the thing, are like, well, no, Curt, actually, this is the way we fix it. And that's where design thinking, what Harold Nelson talks about, and others, the book Design Journeys Through Complex Systems emphasizes, you get these people together and they start talking about it. But once again, they need this shared representation, wherever it is. And then this radical collaboration can emerge out of it. So once again, I think I'm dancing around your question, but I want to emphasize, yes, I think it is super important, and it's very much the way out. Bucky, I think, embraced it with the way he used student teams and multiple student teams. And we should do everything we can to do it. And the good news is, I think there's a lot of extended or external cognition going on around us. And if we just keep working it, it's going to get better. So thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Curt. Next up is going to be Joe, Becky, Peter, and Paul. Joe.
Yeah, I just also want to just reiterate really quickly. how fantastic that presentation is, because I'm just looking at a couple of screenshots and it's starting to come together. Where specifically I was looking at the rich picture of actors and influence, and where you had the households, and then you have the logistics as an example, and that really makes it clear. I mean, as to how this actually works together and how this it's beautifully done. So I'm having a couple of different aha moments. But one of the things that you talked about is the definition and terms that are important within this context, so that we have a shared understanding and we're able to actually make connections. So, you know, the importance of that. So do you have like an ontology that underpins your process, so that they're able to actually, you know, to make those connections within the circles of relevance?
There's a good deep question. Thank you, Joseph. So when I showed a concept map, you'll remember there were these ovals that had a word or phrase in it, and then there's a connection between it to another one. This is not exactly an ontology, but it's headed that way. And so by an ontology, we would say, well, what are these essential components in this area that we'd represent? And sometimes it's verb nouns, right? Verb noun pairs or functions or some of it. And can we develop, quote unquote, a language, right, of a simple set of terms that could describe all kinds of, and so there are examples of, and throughout biology and through all kinds of natural systems description. And the idea, though, is that without worrying too much about the specifics of any one thing, you know, how does one identifiable aspect connect to the next one? And often it does look a little bit like a hierarchy. You know, cells have nuclei, cells have boundaries, etc. And then those other elements like nuclei and boundaries, then they might have attributes, and they might also have elements. So my concept maps are not an ontology, but it's a way to get towards it. I haven't had the time to really develop what Joseph was recommending, which is, well, what are those sort of core things in the way Bucky thinks about stuff, right, and represents it? And could we, you know, put that together in a simple set such that when we come up with a new challenge, we would say, aha, we know, you know, connective things, we know identifiable pieces, we know closure, etc. So this, I think, is a hugely important thing. I've done a couple searches, and there are people sort of on the edges of an ontology of Buckiness. I haven't seen anything yet. As you can tell from me using these concept representations, I think it's very powerful. I should mention that there's a book called Everything Flows, which is a process theory of biology that says that biology is all about process and change rather than what I just said, like cells have nuclei and boundaries, which is a structural view. But there's in fact, that's freely available online, Everything Flows. And so there are process ontologies as well, right? Which is, well, how does a cell develop? How does it go through all these kind of steps? So a lot of words, and hopefully it's some of it at least makes a little bit of sense. So the answer is I don't. It is the goal, maybe beyond the current phase of the work. I think it's super useful. Yeah, if anybody else, you know, has good comments on it, they're welcome to jump in. But yeah, I think it's.
Thank you.
Can I ask one clarification point?
Go ahead.
Just really quickly, when you say process ontology, do you mean domain? The same thing?
Joe, what do you mean by ontology? Can you explain what you mean by ontology?
Yes, it's the interrelationships between things. So so it's not a taxonomy. It's actually where you have the like basically a set of definition and the interactions between those definitions. And you have some things that are actually central, like universals, and then you have particulars. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean,
It's like a taxonomy within our relationships. That's the way I would say.
I don't know. I mean, it's a very deep epistemological point. I don't know exactly where. See, the thing I like, for example, about Bucky is that he keeps going back to nature and trying to see relations from nature and trying to put them together. So it's a you know, I don't know I'm not sure about the kind of the history of ontologies and that way of approaching it versus you know, Bucky's way of approaching it. So I'm not sure about that. So I think it's a very large question about epistemology, because like if you look at Bucky, he is an innovator at an epistemological level. You can see it in his geometry. You know, he's going from natural geometry of spheres and he's building things off that. He's jettisoning the point line system that you start out with. So I think I don't know. I don't have a very good answer to that, but there is a lot of things in epistemology which are wrong. And I don't know where exactly, whether trying to put Bucky's ideas in a certain form may actually be a negative rather than a positive. The idea of this concept maps, the beautiful thing about concept maps is that you're trying to capture relationships that you see. And you're saying, okay, this relationship actually exists and this relationship actually exists. And you're slowly trying to pull together what the actual relationships between things are. So it's a, you know, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure about this, but I'm not really well read on this topic. So I just wanted to say that. Go ahead.
Sounds like a great future thing, Joseph. You know, the jitterbug thing of Bucky's, you know, of things collapsing into various shapes and coming back out, and how some people say it's actually his theories of motion and flow, or maybe the most important ones he had. You could represent those as a process ontology, right? Because the connective stuff is sort of steps in time or changes, if you will, as opposed to, as you said, more taxonomy like. So, but yeah, I agree with Shrikant. That's probably sort of beyond this discussion today, but thanks for bringing it up because it's a great topic I'm interested in.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Becky, Peter, Paul, and Richard. Becky.
Oh, well, I want to say thank you so much for the wonderful diagrams. Now, there was one of the slides, the design science planning process, that I found interesting. It started off with design science being defined as a problem-solving approach. And then so within the circle, it starts with choose the problem situation, followed by define the problems, then define the preferred state, and then the fourth was describe the present state. Now, I guess my own experience has been more in lines with how Harold Nelson has thought of it, to start with the preferred state. So is there a difference or a choice in starting with the problem for that slide, Curt?
Thank you. And thanks for your previous comments, by the way. There was something you said in a previous meetup that I was like, aha, that really helps me think through this, by the way, Becky. So I will say that, you know, that design science, you know, flow was created in the 70s, I think, or maybe early 80s. It was very characteristic of things we did at the time. And like all things, we've advanced, right? Harold is very advanced compared to that. And so in design thinking courses, human-centered, we're not assuming we know the problem when we start, right? But we know there's something out there, you know, and our brain probably has tried to identify it, but we're sort of putting that aside until we talk to the people and do it. And so, yes, I think if we were to bring all that stuff up to the current state, and of course, that's part of what I'm trying to do with the book, by putting these things together, we would not be as what I'll call prescriptive as that diagram might have shown. And that kind of addresses your question. I'm agreeing and saying, yeah, we can do this now. You know, we should not ever view Bucky as static. In fact, I have to go back and get the quote, but Applewhite says in the interview, he's like, he just did the artifacts to attract your attention. Like, you could do this, you know, don't worry about that particular thing, you know, why obsess about the car? You know, there's a lot of other stuff we could do. But I just, you know, was illustrating to you that if you use this methodology, look at that you could have this, you could have that, right? And so I think same in the process, that he would have been eager to update it as well. And of course, he was, you know, hugely, you know, sort of all heart, right? So he would have certainly embraced it. So hopefully that kind of addressed your question.
Oh, yes, you did. Thank you so much. And I agree. I think Bucky would very much be like, oh, well, let's expand this. Let's expand the framework to make sure we're including everything and not necessarily locking it down at the problem, defining our boundaries. Thank you so much, Curt.
Thank you, Becky, and thank you, Curt. See, for CJ, this was a very big point. You know, he insisted on calling it Bucky-inspired comprehensivity. He says, it's not about just Bucky, because really it's about comprehensivity. And you use the knowledge of Bucky, inspiration of Bucky, to go further. And that's what Bucky did all the time himself. You know, he went beyond what Bucky was. I have to point out, I want to give one more kudos to Harold Nelson and his work. I had gone to interview CJ. That was the first interview I did in person after COVID. And I think I and Joe were the first visitors to Jeannie and CJ. And I was interviewing CJ about his book that, you know, Curt mentioned. And he held up this orange book 4 times by somebody else. So I said, wait a minute, why are you holding up this other book when I've come to talk to you about this book? And that was the book Design Way by Harold Nelson. And Harold actually has done a fantastic job of this comprehensivist design in his entire work. So Joe, if you could put the link to Harold Nelson's Design Way playlist in the chat, I recommend it to everybody, because he comes at the same kind of questions from a different angles, and he has profound things to say. So please, you know, have a look at you know, what he's done. Next up is going to be Peter, Paul, and Richard. Peter.
Great, thank you. Of course, when I'm listening, I listen with my own bias, because I hear sometimes what you want to hear, or what married up with what I chose to work on, which was the Genie Initiative. And so I want to go back to where you spoke about this I even have a hard time saying the word regenerative function, that's a requirement for us to, I'm going to say, almost survive. You also spoke about income, energy versus capital. I know right now we use
Peter, we are having trouble with your audio.
So that's what I guess I wanted to speak to when you spoke about and use the tetrahedral example of pulling out either a molecule or a tetrahedron. You have to add one if you want to have a sustainable system. That's a system that uses income generating. Oh, did you lose me? I'm sorry. Did you lose me?
We lost you in the middle. Curt, did you get the question?
Yeah, I think mostly, Peter,
Okay,
if you turn
go
off
ahead.
your video, probably it'll be better. Yeah, of course, it's too simple in a way, right? But the beauty of it is so simple, right? That, you know, if we're just extracting, always extracting, you know, it's just like obvious, right? It's like the mosquito. Nobody likes the mosquito. Well, actually, it turns out the mosquitoes are really useful to birds in the whole big interconnected system. So maybe it's not a great example, but anyway, you know, I think it gives the idea. And then this idea of exchange, and of course, you know, now the whole fungal network, the wood wide web, right? The trees communicating and the fungi providing essential nutrients while they're getting sugar. You know, these are becoming widely known, and people are understanding that there is this reciprocity and this stuff, you know, happening everywhere, you know, underneath our feet, essentially. And so it's just the first step, I guess, Peter, in this whole thing, and actually have some slides on regenerative design, and I've looked into quite a few textbooks, and there's some really good examples. In fact, I'll blank on the woman's name, but the woman who wrote one of these books was actually on, I think it might have been TrimSAP Space Camp, and one of the things she emphasized was, if you're trying to fix the system, a nodal intervention is often very useful. What does that mean? If I can help put together a farmer's market, there's an ongoing thing where I don't have to select the people that are going to come to buy, nor do I select the people who are going to provide. But I have this market that's always there, so somebody can always come, right? As many as can, and different every week. Okay, with things that they provide, and people can on the other side. Once again, I didn't select them, they'll just come. So by putting together the node, she's saying it's an essential part, one of the key approaches in regenerative design, she emphasizes. And what she said is it's a trim tab. It's exactly a trim tab strategy. So I think it's also a very rich thing, probably worthwhile a future presentation, Shrikant, if we can, you know, get somebody like that to talk about that whole regenerativity. And I think Bucky's work, you know, what was one of his famous sayings, and nature is endlessly regenerative. Humans are not, we're extractive. So, and then if you talk to him at our Gable, he's really emphasized, right, just energy income, just living off the energy income, right? And what he called the metabolics, covering out the metabolics of the system. Now we're getting into more and more stuff. Maybe we shouldn't go that far, but it's a great insight, Peter.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Curt. Next up is going to be Paul, followed by Richard. If anybody else has any questions or comments, go ahead and type an exclamation mark. Paul.
Yeah, I'm glad Richard is following me, because Curt, you didn't dance around my question earlier. You answered beautifully, and then Richard elaborated. So that brings me to one more question on that same subject about design applied to, for instance, software systems or things that aren't physical, because things that aren't physical don't lead to that forced, oh, we're in 3 dimensions thing. And if we're in 3 dimensions, we need, well, in digital, you can be in 1 dimension or 2 dimensions. So I want to add Richard's principle of some kind of use of this stuff and see if it's in sync with what we're saying, that connectivity, full connectivity between points is a design factor. That's what you said, and he said in a different way, I think. And it's also very important to avoid connectivity between points. You don't want that person who's in that diagram with the loading dock able to make the little forklift go off and fall off the floating dock because she can press a button, just as an example. So you need constraining. So you design around, pick the system where full connectivity is needed and make that a little module that has at least full connectivity. That's a minimal definable unit, basically I guess a line. And then don't worry if it becomes a tetrahedron. And then every time you want to restrain connection points, you design around it in that way. Does that make any sense? And is it a useful way to think about this applied to the digital world?
Yeah, and actually, I won't be able to give you the names of the diagrams, but there are diagrams like this used in industry where you go through and analyze a situation, or even in cases where it's like, what's gone wrong here, right? And it's related to things like Ishikawa diagram, I believe, fishbone diagram, that sort of thing, which is, well, what are all these different factors? What could influence this, right? So you look at the total connectivity first, and then you start to look at what's the more critical part. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's, and just, to your point, there are other methods of design where you have to be cautious, right? Because you're dealing with stuff that people can get hurt. And then, as you pointed out, don't let this guy do that. There is design where you have to say, well, what if they try? Right? How can you keep the bad actor from doing something? So anyway, yes, it's a very powerful approach that's used at least somewhat in various aspects of design troubleshooting.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Richard. Richard.
Thank you. I'm just going to comment on the computer sort of comments. And when I was at the University of Calgary, and I was showing people the tetrahedron and how you can multiply by dividing. In other words, you take the edges of a triangle, and at their midpoints, you connect them. And then you can keep unfolding that model. And I remember the computer people saying, this is a beautiful model for setting up a computer program, because you can go as deep as you want, or you can come back to whatever might be the basics. And we actually tried it in developing our very first website. But what was interesting is that people cannot get comfortable with triangles. And so it doesn't take long for them to sort of say, I don't like this. And all of a sudden you have a square or a rectangular sort of website that starts to develop. But the other one I wanted to comment on was ontology, because I really like what David Bohm said about ontology. And he was saying that ontology has to do with our worldviews. So you can think of the worldview that we had when the universe was considered a big machine with running on cogs, and then what happened in the early part of the 20th century with all the work of Einstein and eventually into the quantum side and so forth. I was just looking today at a book called Quantum Questions by Kenneth Wilber, and he sort of implied that, well, he actually said that the ontology has to do with the domain of what we're doing, and epistemology has to do with the methodology or the process. And so you combine the two together and you get a kind of a holistic approach to both the domain of your science and the methodology of your science. And what I also liked about him saying that anything can be a science as long as it meets the criteria that in its methodology, it's open to challenge or refutation or confirmation. Anything less than that is nothing but dogma. And I've really found that to be a nice guideline in terms of trying to understand social sciences, physical sciences, mathematical sciences, and so forth.
Excellent, excellent point. Thank you. Thank you, Richard. All right. Does anybody else have any comments? Go ahead and type exclamation mark. So firstly, I really like this dialogue that is taking place. Just amazing set of people coming and talking. And there is this communication between all of us. I'm just starting out. I'm trying, but I'm just starting out. And I think what CJ has got us started, I think is very powerful. And I wanted to, let me see here. Okay, I wanted to show you a because there is a question that I think Paul asked about models, right? I mean, these are models that we're trying to use in order to understand reality. And these are very powerful models. So, Yoshimi and John talked about the tetrameme. And what it does is that it's a way that you can take that, or you can take a conceptual, the mind map that Curt put together, various mind maps that Curt put together. These are all kind of models of trying to think about multiple things that you need to keep in mind, pull them together in one place. And that's the real power of it. So I've been, inspired by people like Struppi who worked with this, and John. I've been, continuing to work with the models. So I want to show you something, but first I'm going to go to John. John, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that we've changed the name of tetrameme to emergently, so we can't use the word tetrameme anymore. But the key thing about emergently, it's these triangles. And to Joe's point about the ontology, what we use is a metaphor of earth, air, water, fire, and you can put them in any position you like, because when you put them together, they're always just interrelated. And the beauty of using the ontology, or the term, as a metaphor, earth, air, water, fire, is that you can always, you can link anything to anything. You can always find a suitable link to your concept to do with a particular element. It's a bit of a challenge to get consistently 4 equally, strong metaphors, but usually you can get at least 3 strong metaphors. But what that does is that you then have earth, air, water, fire relationships of a particular domain, and then you can compare it with your other domain that you're looking at, and that's also got earth, air, water, fire relationships. So suddenly you can see, well, okay, how are the 2 fire things in the different domains related to each other? And immediately you start to see that, because that's the way that the brain works, is through metaphor. Everything in here is literally just a metaphor for what we're experiencing. And so what we've used is that with emergently is we say, well, this is a metaphorical model. It uses the tetrahedron as a model for how things are hard to understand, and we can never actually experience everything. We can experience bits at a time, certain things at a time, but we can explain it, if we unfold it, abstractly into these pieces. But we have to remember that it's actually, the map is not the territory. This is another kind of map. It's a 3D map. I would argue it's a 4D map. And it's got this earth, air, water, fire ontology, which enables you to compare any breakdown or any analysis to any other analysis and see the relationships between them. And there are common relationships using metaphor.
Wonderful. Great point, John. Kind of building up on it, what this particular kind of map does. Map is not the territory, but map is crucial to navigate the territory. That map is how you navigate the territory. The beautiful thing about this map of tetrahedron, for example, is that it allows you to think about many things about it. It allows you to think of it in terms of nodes. What are the nodes here? There are these 4 nodes. Then it allows you to think in terms of the 6 linkages, connections between them. Then it allows you to think of it as faces. So there are 3 different ways you are approaching it. And for each of them is rich. So what is the connection between the nodes? There are 6 different connections, and each of them have a lot of material in that. So you're saying, what is the connection between this and this? So I want to show you what I have. This is my latest thing here. I've been looking at the icosahedrons, and inspired by Tom, I realized that the center of things is crucial. So this is, kind of holding the icosahedron at the center. So you can, going back to CJ's point. So I want to make CJ's point about the four on-ramps. This is the green, okay, which is about designing particular things, okay? This one over here at the end is what he calls integrities. You can think of it as the Tao, the principle behind things that you're trying to get at. Okay, so all of the, like, this is the Tao, and this is the design that you're doing. This is the collaboration that is flowing. The red is the collaboration which is flowing. And this entire center, which is touching everything, are the core ideas. This is the geometry of the entire discipline. So here you can see that you're holding all of it together as one unit. It's one unit. And you can't actually be doing good design unless it is connected to the Tao, the principles of nature. But the only way you can connect to it is through these ideas which bring it together. And the only way you can have a good flow between your design and the Tao is this conversation that is happening. This is the love that is flowing both directions between the thing and the center. So it's like you have all of it in one. So what this does is that this allows you to think about the physical. You see, this is a physical structure that is allowing you to think about metaphysical things. This is like geometry of thinking. But it forces you, it reminds you of all the connections, that there is a complexity to the design. It connects in something. Any idea that you have has to be consistent with the Tao. It has to be practical. It has to be open to collaboration like this through the conversation that is flowing through. Only if that is there, then it's a good idea. So it puts additional constraints on everything to make sure that anything that you do is fully integrated. So that's my example of it that I came up with last night. So thank you. Let's see. Anybody else has any comments? Or let's see here. It's 10:47. So firstly,
Yeah, just
go ahead.
Thank you so much. It's very, it's great to be able to put it together and to get your insightful comments. Very useful. And yeah, Shrikant, what you expressed there metaphorically or metaphysically as well as geometrically is exactly what Bucky was saying about CADS, right? If you all those quotes I put in were really just saying that, right? That it's got to have that integrity, that those parts actually fit in and match together. So it's well said.
Wonderful. So Curt, I really, really love your presentation, and I would love for you to come back often over here, because what you're able to do is that you're able to pull together so many things. I know that it is, you're a lot of collaboration you're doing with a lot of people is pulling everything in. But what you're putting, what you're pulling in together is really, really powerful. So I hope to have you here multiple times. Do send me the presentation. We will see how to get it to everybody. And I, thank you very much for working on the BFI Greatest Ideas of Bucky, because we are going to now go through that. And folks, I invite all of you. I want to proceed as fast as we possibly can. If there is any way in which we can collaborate in any way, like for example, the Trim Tag book club, if it is open to people, please let me know, and we will work together.
Yeah, just
Mhm, go
send,
ahead.
I'll put my email in the chat in case anybody wants.
Is
But
it
yeah,
on Zoom?
It is, it's a Zoom meeting, yeah.
Okay, can you
And,
send
we
me the
have some-
details? Can you send me the details? I will go ahead and figure
Oh,
out.
okay,
Let's collaborate and let's figure out a way of adding more people to that and having a much more greater flow between the book club and what we are doing, because that's going to just benefit everybody. All right, folks. Again, it's an honor to have so many great people come here. We are just getting started with Bucky. We've got 2 years of meetups planned, 100 meetups. We're just getting started. So it's a standing invitation for anybody who wants to present. We're going to have, just want to tell you about the next events coming up. We're going to have, let's see here, give me just a second. There it is. So okay, next up is going to be Christopher Zelov. He's going to be talking about cinematic Bucky themes. That's going to be on February 12th. On February 19th is going to be Doug Jacobs, DW Jacobs, talking about dramaturgical synergies, applying the principle of I am a verb to drama. It's going to be very special, so don't miss that. Next up is going to be Robert Sandusky, who is a colleague of Harold Nelson. He's going to be talking about Bucky's design science and the 4 on-ramps. These 4 on-ramps that we talked about. He's going to be talking about that. Next up is going to be, I actually have a lot of hopes for this, because this is, on the suggestion of Kirby, I have renamed it as Bucky Lightning Talks. Anybody who wants can talk for 5 minutes on any idea connected with Bucky. Doesn't matter how much you know about Bucky or how little you know about Bucky. Take 5 minutes to talk, but that's the best way to actually accelerate your learning. You can take any idea that you want, any deep, just 5 minutes. And then we will have discussions on all the ideas that are presented. That's going to be on March 5th. On March 12th, Rupali Sharma is going to be here. She's an educator, really a profound thinker on Maria Montessori. And she's going to be talking about the parallels between Maria Montessori and Bucky. Actually, there is a lot of interconnection between them. And she has a colleague who has actually written a paper on the interaction between Maria Montessori and Bucky when Bucky was alive. But both that interaction and the ideas. And then on March 26th is going to be Richard talking about social tensegrity. So folks, that's what is coming up. Don't miss any of them. And if you miss, it is available on YouTube. So let's learn together. And again, Curt, hats off to you. Amazing, amazing presentation. Thank you very much, everybody. Good night.